Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's show. We have special guests, Scott Howell and Bradley Flowers. They have the Insurance Guys podcast. And y'all, this podcast is blowing up. People all over the country are reaching out to them with questions and asking them to be keynote speakers at conferences, trade shows. They are just amazing. They have gone from right here in Mobile, Alabama at Deep Fried Studios to taking on the world. And you never know. You may want to start your own podcast. I'm Karen. I'm a CPA, entrepreneur with big ideas, and I'm the mom.
I'm Cadie. I'm a payroll specialist, business owner, and detail-oriented person that makes things happen, and I'm the daughter. Welcome to Cheers to Business.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's show. We've got the Insurance Guys podcast. We're excited. They're growing all over the country. And it's Scott Howell, Bradley Flowers. And we want to thank you guys for being on the show today. And we want to hear your story and your journey.
Thanks so much for having us. Really appreciate it.
I'm excited because you guys are fellow friars. We are on there. Johnny Gwynn, our producer, he has Deep Fried Studios. And so if you go to deepfriedstudios.com, you can find the Insurance Guys and Cheers to Business.
Yep.
And all those other shows, too. I think you got one on sinuses and one on Girls Can. So
Lots of good stuff on that website.
I love you, Johnny.
I love you, too, Johnny. He's the best producer ever.
He is.
Absolutely.
We would not be where we are without Johnny. That is for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, we know how ours came about, but how did you guys hook up? Because you're in Birmingham, Scott, right?
Oh, Huntsville, Alabama.
Okay.
Guys, before we get started, let me say this. I am humbled, honored, and blessed to be on this podcast today. Today, for me, I am not emotional
You got
today.
a good talking to before you came on.
Yeah, Bradley doesn't know what to do when I get emotional and start crying. But I am very grateful today, and I feel very blessed today, and I'm blessed to be on this podcast. I want to say thank you to both of you for having us.
Well, for you even to
Cheers.
take time out
Cheers.
of your day for us.
Cheers.
Thank
Thank you.
So Bradley and I have just gotten through doing how many podcasts today, Bradley? Four? 5?
We did 8 in 2 days.
8 in
Normally
2.
we do 8 in a day, or at least the
People
last
don't
couple
realize
sessions.
that's a
we've done.
lot.
Yeah.
It is.
When you finish doing 8 podcasts, and I'll get back to your question in just a second. But
Bring him in.
Yeah. But when you do eight podcasts in a day, you just want to go crawl up in a fetal position in your walk-in closet and go sleep.
I mean, I'm tired, but I'm ready to
Does
go.
it energize
Like,
you?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
It
for
does.
me, by the end of the day, because I'm so laser beam focused on what questions I want to ask and those kinds of
And
things.
he puts in more work during the podcast.
Right.
I would say I put in more work outside of the podcast.
True.
But he puts in more work during the podcast.
Right.
You know, he's sort of the talent,
Right.
and I sort of handle the business side of things.
I don't
you
know if I would say talent, but my energy level's at about a 25, during the podcast.
You
And
are pumped.
To keep that energy level up, which I'm right now keeping tamped down because I don't want to scare everybody in here off. To keep that energy level at about a
we'd be okay.
15 or 20, it takes a lot of work on my part to keep it that way.
Can we have a sneak peek?
Insurance agents from around the world,
That's
welcome
nothing.
to the
That is
Insurance
nothing.
Guys podcast.
What is that, like a
nothing.
level 17?
Yeah, it's nothing.
All right.
Yeah,
So
no-
what would you do for Cheers to Business?
And then
give
I introduced Bradley. And before we get started on today's podcast, please help me welcome. He is a 6'3" sophomore from Saraland, Alabama, a parade All-American, Rivals 5-star recruit. Ladies and gentlemen, he is a fantastic insurance agent and a great American. Please stand and welcome the incomparable Mr. Bradley Flowers.
I
You keep a
mean,
straight face. That's awesome.
I get used to it.
I feel like I'm walking into a boxing
You
ring.
want to know what the number one question
Try
I
doing
got?
that for 8 hours.
I just got back 2 weeks ago from Miami, Florida. I spoke at an insurance conference there, and the number one question I got, either in person, it was, holy crap, you're not really 6'3", you're 5'2",
Right.
or through Instagram. I had people messaging me leading up to the conference. I can't wait to see if you're really 6'3", or something to that effect. And I probably missed some opportunities of connecting with some guests because they're looking for this big tall guy there. You know?
Right. Well, yeah, and so when we started the podcast, I wanted it to be very original.
Tell the story of how we got to the podcast.
Yeah, so
we never told that on a podcast.
Right. So I live in Huntsville, Alabama. Bradley obviously lives in Mobile, and I at the time for about 2 years, I was doing a Facebook Live feed. Tried to do one once a week because, as we all know, sitting here for your listening audience, first rule of podcasting is you got to be consistent. You can't do a podcast once every 4 months. If you want to pick up traction and start gaining an audience, you have to be consistent.
At least once a week.
Exactly. So I was doing a Facebook Live video called "Ask the Insurance Guy Online," and I found Bradley on Instagram, and I started talking to him via Instagram because he
Snapchat.
May have been Snapchat.
It was Snapchat.
Okay. Well, whatever medium it was, we started talking because he was putting out some content about local insurance agents, and I loved his content. He had a really cool video. I don't know how you did it, but the music was really cool. And then you jumped on a skateboard and skated down the street.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, he's like me.
Is your insurance agent rad bad and named Brad? And I jumped on the skateboard.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Because a lot of people don't know this. I used to skateboard.
Right. And I could tell you knew what you were doing. Yeah. So when I saw that, I was like, this son of a bitch is putting out some great content. And I reached out to him. Well, sometime in the middle of me reaching out to Bradley and having a man crush on him, I actually went to his Instagram page and I was like, holy shit, he's in Mobile, Alabama. Because I figured he was in like California or somewhere like that. So we started talking, and then one day I was like, hey, man, would you mind if I called you? Do you remember this?
Yep,
I was driving down.
I remember what we talked about.
Yeah, I was driving down the 565 freeway that day, and he and I started talking, and I said, hey, I'm going to be down in Mobile, actually Orange Beach, on vacation in a couple of weeks, and I can't stand my family. Can I come over to your office and record an episode of Ask the Insurance Guy Online?
And so I'm like, yeah, sure.
Yeah. So it
was 2 days before I proposed to my wife.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He told me at lunch that day he was about
to.
And I think you told me I was like the only person that knew you were going to propose.
At that time, I think, yeah.
So I went over there. We recorded this episode, and as we stopped the recorder on the phone or whatever I was using at that time, I looked at Bradley and I said, "Man, we need to start doing a podcast."
And then it was born.
And he said, "Okay, well, let's do it." And I said, "Well, don't say you're going to do it unless we're going to do it."
Yeah. It was something that I knew the value of. I'd always wanted to do, and so we just sort of. I kind of viewed it as like, okay, this will just be something fun. Like, we won't ever really do anything with this. And
wrong.
We did a bunch of research, and eventually came to the conclusion that we were going to do it remotely. And he was going to record audio on hit. We were going to be on Skype. This is before Johnny, and I'd always known about Johnny and been a fan of Johnny and respected Johnny from an advertising perspective. Knew he was into podcasting, but didn't think I was worthy to step foot in the studio, and I still don't think I am. And I was recording on my end, and Scott was recording on his end, and we were attempting to match the audio up.
How the heck could you do that?
It was terrible.
It was awful.
And so the first time we did it, other than it sounding like cats being skinned, it went okay technology-wise. Everything went right technology-wise. The second time, this is about a month or two later.
Right.
The second time, and I've told this part of the story on another podcast. The second time we did it, absolutely everything went wrong. Everything went wrong. First, my audio wasn't working, then his wasn't working, then I could hear him. We did like a half an episode, and I could not hear you.
Right.
And I was just shaking my head and trying to read your lips, because I'm one of these guys that when things go wrong, I just try to go with the flow a little bit. And I was actually late. I was actually late. Laurel, my wife, fiance at the time, did not know I started a podcast, because I'm one of these guys, when I'm doing something that's a little bit outside the box, I don't tell anybody, because I don't want that bit of criticism or that bit of doubt. I don't want anybody to doubt it. Not that she would doubt it.
Don't hold me back.
Yeah. I don't want. I just don't want any doubt creeping in my mind, because if I'm doing something outside the box, I want to stick with it until I know. You know what I mean? And I didn't tell anybody for that reason. Everything went wrong that session, so we had scheduled premarital counseling with the preacher, who just so happened to be her Southern Baptist grandfather.
Oh.
And we pressed record on that, Johnny. It stopped for whatever reason. Everything went wrong. I was late for that. That was the first one, and I was late. Tried explaining. You don't even know this story, do you? I was late because everything went wrong on my podcast.
That she didn't know about.
That she didn't know about, and he didn't know what a podcast was. But that being said, she was like, "That is so awesome! You started a podcast." I'm like, "I don't know why I'm marrying you now."
Yeah.
And so that was fine. I'm not a huge jerk for doing that. Like, she understood. But it was the next day. So actually, it was that day. I went back to the house, sat down at the computer that I was sitting at. Everything went wrong, and messaged Johnny Gwynn and said, "I'm trying to start a podcast. I need you to help me." That sort of thing. And one thing led to the other, and that's how we ended up here. You want to take it from there, or you want to?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question.
It's kind of a long story. So
Yeah.
That's all right, because we know how we got started, and when was the turning point for you when you knew that we actually have something viable here?
You say what you think, and I'll say what I think because I bet it's different.
You know, in some ways, I have a lot of self. I don't have a lot of. There's some parts of me that I have a lot of. What do you call that? Self. I'm not real self confident in some areas. I have some self doubt in some areas of my life, but when it comes to things like speaking in front of large audiences and things like the podcast, I think that early on when we started, after we met Johnny, and I realized Johnny knew what he was doing, and that the quality of the podcast was going to be really good. And I listened to a couple of our episodes and how they went and the way we were introducing the podcast.
It's the editing too,
right?
I mean, the editing's top notch.
Exactly, and I don't
makes
know.
It sound better than we are.
Well, Johnny's sitting in here right now. I don't know how much they edit our podcast. I don't think it's a ton. I do think it's some.
A lot of
Johnny won't look him in the eye.
Is it a lot? I don't know. 30%. Okay. Well,
ours is probably like 90.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I guess the bottom line is this. When it came to the podcast, I realized pretty early on that we were going to have something that was pretty special.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. More so than anything else, it's just the relationship that Bradley and I have, and our energy that we have, and how we play off of each other on the podcast.
And that's important. I think that's kind of one thing, us being mother and daughter, we kind of had that natural chemistry. And it's great that you guys, you found each other.
Tell them what Joey
though.
said yesterday on the podcast.
Joey Gingola is a sort of an influencer in the insurance industry. And Joey has a very distinct personality and style. He's very dry. And that's him. And he told us yesterday.
I like dry
he said,
people.
Yeah, he told us. He said he's dry, and he told us. He said you guys need to be lucky that you found each other and that you're completely different, but you can also
I feel like
play
drawing
off
a
each
heart
other's.
around you guys right now. That is so sweet.
There it is.
But
Can you take the picture?
for me, it was still fun. It was just something, and it
is fun.
And do you get scared sometimes when you batch like this? So up until this point, you guys have been, recording, and then it releases that week or the next week at the latest. When you batch, and we've batched from the beginning since we've been working with Johnny. What's that? So what for everybody listening? What batching is we record 8 episodes in a day versus doing them as they're released weekly.
Yeah, we're trying to do 6 today.
And Scott needs to go sleep for 14 hours.
It's the best way to do
cable versus Netflix.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the best way to do it if you want to be consistent. That's what Sydney Rowe with Agency Nation asked us on a podcast a few weeks ago, and we're on their podcast. Man, that's a big commitment you guys do weekly. Well, if we batch and we just block off 2 days every 2 months and we pump out at least 10 episodes, we're good.
And I'm doing it because of tax season.
Right. It's a time thing.
Yeah.
Right. You're just playing the extremes.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, and for us, that was the best way to do it. I'd rather block off. It's easier for me to block off 2 days every 2 months than it is to block off an hour every week.
Yes.
Honestly.
And
I agree.
And you have to double it because of travel time.
Travel time, and he's driving 6 hours.
Well, and mental energy as well. Like we talked about, it's a mindset recording.
Yep,
sure.
And so by doing it all day long versus, all right, you've got your work hat on and then your podcast hat.
Well, I'm not thinking about that meeting I just had and that guy pissed me off.
Exactly.
So I'm focused on this.
Well, and you can
Exactly.
set an auto reply like, hey,
Right.
And
Well, I wrote 2 insurance policies yesterday, but
I did not.
But anyway, crap! I just said that on Instagram Live. Anyway, so we batched, and from the beginning, and what would happen is I would say something 6 weeks ago. I recorded a podcast 6 weeks ago, and then when it, I felt like my heart was outside my body. I'm like, I hope I didn't say something that I thought was kosher 2 months ago.
Right.
That's going to get me in hot water now. That took the longest time to get over. And what happened? So I'm in a paid mastermind group on Facebook for insurance agents. It's $2,400 a year.
So you pay to be part of that.
It's a group of insurance agents this is the moment I knew we had something cool. It was a group of insurance agents. There's about 500 insurance agents in there who all pay upwards of $2,000 a month to share ideas. And a guy posted it in there, not knowing that I was in the group.
I remember that.
Oh, no.
And Laurel probably remembers this. I freaking lost my crap. I was so nervous. I was like having a full-on panic attack because I really care what these people think.
Right.
And I'm like, crap, if they think
probably
I'm
scared of
if they
what
think
they
I'm
think.
an idiot, yeah. if they think I'm an idiot, I'm like, oh my God. And it was one of the episodes with just he and I.
Right.
It wasn't one where like,
okay.
we always say our guests are the stars. We're not the stars. There was like nothing but compliments. And so kind of from then on, another kind of benchmark was he and I got invited to go up.
That's the best thing that could have happened to you guys.
Yeah. And he and I got invited to go up to Stafford Springs, Connecticut to mastermind and meet with one of the guests on our podcast, Chris Paradiso, who's one of the largest hometown insurance agents in the country. And we spent 2 days and we had he had connected us with so many influential people, carrier CEOs that we talked on the phone with. And he looked me directly in the eye. It was like one of the last things we did before we left. And he said, 5 years from now, you're going to say starting this podcast was the best thing you've ever done.
Yeah.
If nothing else, for connections.
That's awesome. And you guys are booking like speaking engagements now.
We
And
booked 2 today.
that's amazing.
So where do you go to? Either one of you go to next?
I'll go home. No, I'm not. I'm going to stay down in Mobile tonight. But I'll say this, guys, and I'm about to get real emotional on everybody. So 2 things that I will say to your listening audience right now that podcasting has done for us. One is all the unintended consequences, some of which Bradley just talked about, that we never thought of when we started that. The relationships with people that are like the people in the insurance industry and like the thought leaders of the insurance industry that we now, I'm not going to say we know all of them, but Bradley, we know we know a lot of them, a bunch of them. And then the second thing that probably is going to make me emotional is how we've impacted a lot of people's lives.
Yeah.
And they send us emails, DMs, messages, Facebook messages, call us, text us, and they send us emails about what we've been able to do for them
Right.
and how we've changed their
That's
lives.
fantastic.
That's what's kept us going. Those were
you
the
made an
moments that we
impact.
realized
Yeah.
that this was something cool, but that's what keeps us going.
Katie told me
But-
that one time. She said, I had something that happened and we got emotional because I get emotional on the show
Right.
too.
Yeah.
And she said, Mom, you made an impact. She said, that's what I want to do. I want to make an impact with my life. And that was so profound when you said that.
Yeah.
And I think you guys are doing it.
Well, and that's what, growing up, I knew I wanted to do something that could make a difference. And traditionally, you think, okay, nonprofit, but by doing what we're doing, we're helping other people, make their dreams a success. And I think that's the difference. We didn't get into podcasting to, people to know us or to make money. It was
It's
really
not about getting business.
Is it not
That's
a tremendous?
not
Is it
what
not a
is.
tremendous amount of pressure though?
It
I feel like
is.
these people, I don't need to be an idiot today.
Well,
because people, if I say, hey, you need to do this on your taxes and it's wrong, and they do it, not that anything
Yeah.
you'd say be wrong, but like you have to really be on your game when people are listening to you,
Yep.
which is the whole reason why we bring on guests. Because I'm not going to sit here and try to teach you how to do Google AdWords, even though I know just enough to be dangerous. I'd rather bring on a guy like Jerry Nicolo who knows how to do it.
And that's why we have guests
Yeah,
too. Something
it's-
outside of our norm. Now, what we are doing is I tell people when they say, what's the podcast about? I said, we're answering questions we get asked every day.
Yeah.
Just happens to be we're drinking wine.
Yeah.
And that
Cheers.
was my thing is I found myself having so many conversations with really great people, great conversations just about our life as women and in business and growing and networking and all of that. And that's really what it was, is just these conversations.
Well, the impact I think what you're having too is that people are hearing your story of being a teenage mom and still staying in school and fighting, and now you own your own business and this podcast, and so people
It
listening.
has 2 of the cutest kids you'll ever see in
Isn't she
the entire
though?
world.
And a smoking
Yeah.
hot husband.
Your wife, oh my goodness, she's
Yeah, she's
beautiful.
gorgeous.
Thank you. I
Did you
appreciate
pay her?
That's terrible.
The unintended consequences of
She's gorgeous.
podcasting.
I'll tell you whatever. I have a friend named Mike Stromso that's a thought leader in the insurance business, and he says something that I think is very applicable to both Cadie and myself. Whatever your past is, your future is spotless.
Love it.
Love it.
No regrets.
Every now and then he just pulls something, a piece of gold just out of nowhere.
And so what I'm going to say to both of you is this.
Should have break it. Should have been
If there's anything,
Good, I'm glad you cursed. I didn't know if I could curse or not.
if there's anything
He'll
that
beat me.
if there's anything I can say to your listening audience, it's this. So for Bradley and I think at some point, probably within the last 3 or 4 months, we have realized that we no longer have to wonder what our legacy is going to be
That's true.
Wow, that's deep.
moving
That's
forward.
huge.
And for the so many people wonder what their legacy is going to be. Maybe they don't ever think about that. Maybe they don't ever think what their legacy is going to be. But this podcast will undoubtedly be our legacy when we're not here on earth anymore. So
My favorite is obviously in owning a business or being an entrepreneur, there's some really ups and downs.
Right.
And I mean, there's times when you question, what am I doing? But
How about when we're going round?
so as of today, you have made it through
happens.
100% of your worst moments.
Right.
And I just love that. And it's really motivation just to keep pushing.
Yeah, and for me, that's a big part of this podcast, and some of the things I've been able to do is I think I've reached a point in life. I just turned 47 years old that I really just don't give a shit anymore.
I'm 53 and I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I really just don't care. Like, I know Bradley was talking about having nerves and being nervous about the podcast. I don't. It's just like breathing to me. I just get on and go.
So how has your self-doubt changed from the beginning? Or has it?
I don't know that it has. I just don't think that is an area in my life when it comes to speaking in front of audiences or talking to people or doing that kind of thing. Even in insurance, like so many people in insurance have that thing inside them, like they're like, "Oh, I can't go up and talk to her about insurance." And I've just always been like, "Hey, here's my card. Call me if you ever need some insurance."
That's
no big
her.
deal. No big deal. And I talk to people all the time that are just like, that's like barbed wire to them. They're just not going to do that.
My GYN hired me one time.
Yeah, right. I think myself.
Just having a conversation anywhere.
Yeah, I think my self doubt.
No, it's true.
My self doubt.
Funeral home too.
Welcome to my life, Scott.
Sorry.
Just trying to share your thoughts. And
right.
You ever seen that movie where the gynecologist, how old she is, and he's like, "We'll just count the rings."
Oh my gosh.
That's awesome.
Okay, so Scott, you were saying.
No, I don't know if I even want to say
Brought it up,
but
so
I have self doubt in areas. I think the things I've been through in my life.
Serious.
I'm in therapy right now. I have a therapist that I have to go see because I have anger issues. I have emotional issues. If my wife was here right now, she could do a 4-hour podcast on, I have times when that Scott that Bradley sees all the time turns into something that nobody wants to see. And I have to fight that, I have to fight those feelings and a lot of anger and resentment from the past,
Yeah.
So,
well, that's real life. I mean, oftentimes people just paint this perfect
Right.
picture. We talked about that earlier today, and it's just keeping it real.
Yeah.
authenticity.
I suffer from anxiety, and so I've got a weighted blanket on my lap right now just
Right.
because it helps comfort me.
Right. That's why I have sunglasses on. Somebody asked me yesterday, said, "Why do you wear sunglasses in the podcast?" And I said, I don't know, but it just makes me feel more comfortable.
Whatever makes you
Yeah,
exactly comfortable. So as far as if someone wants to start a podcast or they're interested, you guys have really grown yours. So that's what, as we're still pretty new in our first season, what contributed to your growth?
I'll let Bradley talk.
One thing that we did were the guests.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, we picked guests. Man, you killing that.
That's some good wine.
It is.
I don't have anything to do after
Brooke at Donkey Market.
Oh, what are we
gave us that.
drinking?
Let me see.
Sorry,
Donkey
Bradley.
Market,
this. Is Riesling 20.
Milbrandt
Milbrandt?
Vineyards.
Donkey Market, DOMKE.
Oh,
not
you know
donkey.
what? She had this wine. It was one of the wines at our Corks and Forks.
Oh, the supper club?
The supper club dinner.
got an idea.
It was amazing. Oh my God, the food. It was held at the Mobile Museum for Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras Museum.
Donkey Market's awesome, aren't they?
Oh man, Brooke, she's the bomb. But they had this wine, so I bought like 6 bottles because it was so good. So thought I'd bring one on the show.
Bradley, growth.
So the one thing that we did, here's the thing about working with Johnny and making, anybody can download Anchor and do a podcast, okay? But when the quality of the podcast is suspect or average, the content has to be absolutely fire. And the one big advantage that we had from the beginning since we started using Johnny, and I'm not saying this because he's in the room, is even if we have a guest, we had some guests recently that, the content, I mean, it's good. We pick good people, but the content's not
It's not exciting.
Not that, you have entertainment and you have educational. And if you don't have either one of those, it's kind of, we at least sound good.
That's
and we
one of
sound
our
amazing.
biggest goals is that balance of exciting and entertaining, but
still
still
education.
have that education. And some episodes have more than the other.
best episodes have both.
Yes.
But even if we don't have any of those, we sound freaking amazing.
Oh, yeah.
We sound as good as, it's kind of like if you listen to audiobooks,
I do.
Do not download the 10X Rule by Grant Cardone. Once you listen to that, you will never listen to another audiobook again because he reads it and he gets fired up and expands on topics, and then you listen to, and then we do this, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, because traction's like that.
And so it turned Laurel, my wife, into a podcast snob. Now she can't. One of her favorite podcasts was one by someone we all know, not local, national. She can't listen to it anymore because it's just him in his office with a condenser mic, and you can hear everything going on around him.
Oh,
so
okay,
we had the quality. So what would happen is we would reach out to guests, and they'd be like, well, I don't know. And then they'd listen to us and they'd be like, holy crap, these guys are legit, even if we only had 100 people listen to us. So we did that. But then what we did is we reached out to guests who, I'm not going to say weren't deserving to be on the podcast, but that we might not normally get because they had followings. We reached out to people who had followings first, and then we encouraged them to promote it. That was the two. Those were the
That's
two
why we
things.
reached out to you.
Well,
Those were the two things we did,
That's
and
not
Johnny
true. We
calls
really
that
like
Johnny
it.
calls that coattailing.
Yeah.
So
Right.
we coattailed
It
a
is
little
true.
bit.
Don't-
One of our
It is
first
true.
guests. One of our first guests had a YouTube video that had 40 million views.
Holy
Wow.
cow.
He was first. Like he was the first one. I was like, we're getting that guy.
yeah.
So-
and
How
to-
long did it take you to get him, though?
well, and
Like a week.
yeah, and to add
He's
what
just a normal guy.
to add what Bradley's saying right now, and I 1,000% agree with everything
And I'm
you just
rambling
said.
because I'm drinking wine.
No. I 1,000% agree with what you just said. And what I'm about to say is going to sound cocky. It's going to sound arrogant, and I'm sorry for that. But I do think there's a talent component to this.
There is.
And I think that our ability to take a topic that is as boring as watching a paint on a wall dry and be able to
talking about
get,
insurance?
to get on a
accounting.
podcast, to get on the
me, that's sexy
podcast
because
and
it's
have the energy level I have that at, and to be able to tell amazingly funny stories all the time, or
Right.
say something that is just like people just fall on the floor like, I can't believe that some bitch just said that. You know, you can get somebody to a podcast because of the sound quality and the this and the great guest or whatever, but you also got to be able to get them back.
Yeah, you're right.
Right.
And there is a talent component to this, no different than why somebody makes it big in the music industry or on a pilot on television. And then that fourth component is our, like I said when
It
we
is
sat
the
down,
relationship.
us playing off each other.
Well, and one
doing
thing
that.
too, we've done it so many times now. We can
Right.
sit down and start, and we're like,
Right.
it's, you know what I mean.
It just
Right.
happens.
Well, let's hear your story. Let's
Yeah,
stop talking
enough
about
about
us.
us.
I can.
Because if we keep talking about us, we're going to be here a while. So.
But I will say this: whatever your audience is about to start a podcast on, if it's a niche or whatever.
Well, Johnny came to my Rotary, West Mobile Rotary, and spoke, and man, they got people pumped.
Yeah.
And so they had their phones out. They were
Sure.
looking up Cheers to Business, and then they started asking me,
Right,
questions,
right.
and wanted how to get in touch with Johnny. And so that's one reason, really, we wanted to have you guys on to talk about just podcasting, because it
Right.
is becoming such a form of communication
Sure.
that is replacing.
Absolutely.
And
I think it's
so-
going to replace the radio eventually.
I had never listened to a podcast before Cadie said, let's do a podcast.
And it was something at first, because we would talk about something. I'm like, man, we need a podcast. Just because I was having trouble finding one that I really connected with, because it just didn't have that balance of entertainment and education. And so I was like, let's do it.
Well,
Well,
how-
that's us.
The day it
just said
came
it.
out, though, that
Well, hold
we,
on.
we call each other on the weekends and talk business.
Right.
We do.
Wait. I went to a conference where Johnny was presenting, and it was on podcasting. And that's that was the final moment where I was like, we have got to do this now. Like, we cannot wait. Someone else is going to have this, had the name, was ready.
Right.
And then,
All right. So we're sitting there it's a Sunday afternoon,
Right.
and we hash this business thing out. We talk, different problems, and we come up with solutions. And she's asking my advice, and I'm asking hers. And she goes, she said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm on the back porch drinking a glass of wine. I said, what are you doing? She said, I'm on the back porch drinking a glass of wine, but your view's better than mine. And then she said, we should do a podcast. Well, I went, okay.
so I emailed Johnny hey, me and my mom want to start a podcast. We came in to do kind of the consultation. I was like, all right, here's the name. Here's what we're thinking for the logo. Here's what we're going to talk about. I mean, we were ready to roll.
Who came up with the name?
You did.
I did.
Yeah.
Nice.
Cadie did.
I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
Well,
Goodbye self-doubt.
Yeah. Right.
And the domain was available. So, I mean, I was like, it's
That
meant
was
to
part
be.
of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's there's nothing worse when you come up with a good name and the domain's
Yeah.
$8,000.
See, and to make ourselves feel more important, or me, I don't know. And thank you for being so honest and truthful earlier, because we all have our stuff. Right. But, people say, well, how'd you get to do a podcast? I said, a producer picked us up.
Hey, you want to talk about a strange day for me? So Bradley's in Cuba, and he goes down to Cuba, and so I don't know if it was a coincidence or if it was like, I don't know what happened, but people start. Now, I grew up a country boy in a small town, a rural town in Alabama, and I'm sitting there driving down the interstate, and a publicist from New York calls me, wanting one of her clients to get on our podcast. And I told Bradley, I said,
Stop it.
this was like 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago?
Oh, my gosh.
Well, that week I had, he's gone.
I handle all of that.
He handles every bit of that.
Okay.
And of course, I posted a funny video on our Facebook page about, guys, I have nothing to do with any of that shit. Y'all,
You were calling Bradley. He was sitting on the toilet.
I was sitting on the toilet. And I was talking about how I'm like, guys, I'm the talent. This man's in charge of all that shit, so y'all better get in touch with him. But I'm like, the day 2 weeks ago, I had a publicist from New York, like,
wow,
Scott, this is so and so from some name like Hashburger, blah 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 blah, and so
and we're to the point now where we don't necessarily, if you're selling a product, we're it's a little harder to break through.
Yeah.
Would you? I want to ask. Do you mind if I ask Bradley something on this podcast?
Go ahead.
Love it.
I don't know that I've ever asked you this question before, but like when people reach out to us with email, like wanting themselves to be on the podcast,
Happens a lot.
Yeah, I know. Trust me. Do you kind of like? Does it make you be like, nah, I don't think I want that guy on the podcast? Yeah. It does me too. It's almost like if we're not the ones reaching out to you.
I had a guy call me.
We're like divas now.
Sorry.
Well, it's one of those. It's like
No, I want you to sign your autograph.
there's an agenda. You know what I mean?
And I knew you win. No, sign your name. I want your autograph.
There's an agenda. You know what I mean? If you're asking, I've been on plenty of podcasts even prior to ours, and I never asked to be on, even though I wanted to be. I'm empathetic to that. I understand. But
no, I would never ask to be on.
If people ask to, I'm like, this one guy reached out to me on Twitter, and he was kind of, he was kind of a, owned a company, and I'm always like, I take a lot of phone call meetings, Skype meetings, and I have no idea what the reason is. And sometimes they lead to amazing things. And I'm like, and first thing, what can I do for you? And he's like, well, to start, you can put me on your podcast. And I'm like,
wah, wah, wah.
No. Okay. I have one thing else to ask you before we got to wrap it up today, especially since I think they can hear my stomach growling through this podcast. How the hell did you get Gary V to Mobile, Alabama to the Senior Bowl Summit?
Golly bum. That's probably the thing I'm the most proud of Bradley for.
So in 2014, Ren Bartlett and I connected on Facebook over a Gary Vaynerchuk video.
Really?
And
Ren's a great guy.
Ren's like, man, he fires me up, And so I'm like, let's get lunch and talk about it. And I was kind of new here. I grew up about an hour away. Might as well have grown up in Iraq. Where I grew up, everybody thought people got murdered every second of every minute in Mobile, even though it's really not that way. And people are scared. I moved here, and I was trying to connect with people. And we're talking over lunch. He's like, man, I don't think he'd fly down here. And literally at that moment, I was like, I want to be the guy to bring him to Mobile.
You did it.
And with the help of Scott Tyndall. But basically, fast forward to, I'll make this short. Fast forward to August of 2017, I randomly emailed him. And he and I had met once before. I had randomly emailed him and said, hey, man, I want to hold a conference in Mobile in conjunction with the Senior Bowl, week of the Senior Bowl, because Gary owns a company called Vayner Sports, and they're a sports agency. And it's part of a sports agent's job to sort of schmooze at the Senior Bowl a little bit. And that's their kind of networking. Excuse me. And Gary's people had been down here once before. And I was like, I know eventually you're going to come, so I would like to set up a co-deal with the Senior Bowl and you speaking at a conference in exchange for access. And he forwarded it to his brother, AJ, who actually runs a sports agency, who is the registered sports agent. And AJ's like, this is 2017. AJ's like, yeah, this would be, we'd be interested in this if you could pull this off. Meanwhile, I had zero connections to the Senior Bowl. It's as far from as you could possibly imagine. And I'm one of these guys that's like, I'm a big idea guy, and then I figure out how to do it. And sometimes the big idea is so overwhelming that I drop it. And that's what happened. I dropped it. Fast forward to October of 2018. I posted on Instagram, anybody want to get breakfast in the morning and talk business? And Scott Tyndall was the first person to respond. And, Scott Tyndall's one of these guys that everything he touches turns to gold.
He was on the show not too long ago.
Yeah. And I'm like, that was an amazing show, by the way. And so I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Let's make it happen. So we met at Sylvia's Biscuits and Po' Boys, had breakfast, and he's telling me about this consulting company he started, and he's working with a couple different organizations. And he mentioned the Senior Bowl, just happened to mention it. And I didn't know where he was going with it. And I said, man, let me tell you what I almost pulled off one time. And he leaned up in his chair and he's like, I'm working with the Senior Bowl right now. He's like, you want to try to make this happen? And I'm like, I email AJ back and I'm like, hey, I know it's been a year and a half, but it looks like this is about to happen. Which I kind of positioned it in a way like AJ probably thought I'd been working on it for a year and a half, and I didn't drop off the face of the planet. So one thing led to the other. Scott and I met with the Senior Bowl. They were 1,000,000% on board. They're for anything that builds out the week.
Well, that makes sense.
And they can focus on football, and so that was kind of how it worked. And
you're telling a really long story.
Sorry.
Long.
This is a short version of it.
Oh.
Fast forward, one thing led to the other. He ended up coming. So
well, he's
awesome.
going to speak next year, and I was there, and I went ahead, go big or go home. So I was in the premium seating.
Yeah.
And I was like 4 rows back. From the stage, and I tell you what, you guys did a fabulous job. It was phenomenal.
Scott Tyndall.
And wait till I think it was a community.
Scott kind of took the lead on it, but
he pushes people. People want to do what he says. They realize the smartness of what he's saying, I think, and people want to be successful, and so they coattail again. Yes, what we were saying before. But, I can't wait till next year.
It's going to be amazing. We might need a bigger venue.
Can I meet Gary V, please?
Yeah, we can
please,
work that
please.
out. We can work that out.
I would love to meet him.
Yeah.
You got to pay for premium with me next year.
So before we go, I'll say this. In terms of our podcast and our growth and what we've done, Johnny keeps up with those numbers. I really don't need them because I get between 10 to 15 Facebook friend requests a day from insurance agents all over the country. So what they're doing is they're going to our, somehow, some way getting to our podcast, listening to it, and then friend requesting me. And, of course, we've got some other thought leaders that mention us as well when they talk in big groups. But, it's been a blessing in our life, and I would encourage anybody to give it a shot and see if they've got what it takes. It's kind of like the Marine Corps. You can step on the yellow footprints and see if you got what it takes to do it. But we couldn't have gotten where we are today, obviously, without Johnny. I mean, he's been a huge part of that. Huge part of that.
Absolutely.
And the love and support of people like y'all as well. So thank you so much for having us.
Well, thank you for coming on the show today. I can't tell you what it meant to us. I know you guys are busy, and just people are getting more and more interested, and as we're trying to grow, and you guys are just growing leaps and bounds. Cadie?
So we always end with a cheers. So I say cheers to podcasting.
Yep.
Cheers to podcasting. Cheers to the insurance guys.
Well, thank you so much.
Cheers
thank
to
you
Johnny.
for having us.
There we go.
Y'all, thank you so much for listening and being here with us today. I'm Karen.
I'm Cadie. Please be sure to subscribe to Cheers to Business podcast on iTunes or anywhere else that you get your podcast. Visit our Facebook and be sure to give us a like. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to discuss, shoot us an email from the website cheerstobusiness.com.